Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I see some familiar faces from last week. Hello. If anybody would like to turn on their video, it would be amazing to see your lovely faces as we dive into today's topic, navigating reactions and difficult conversations. Super excited. Is everybody excited? Thumbs up. All right. So I want to start by asking all of you a couple of questions, and you can either respond by giving me the thumbs up if you've got your video on. For those of you who don't have your video on, you can go to your reactions on your toolbar there and do the thumbs up as well, right? Or the smiley face or whatever works for you. Okay, but if you one thing to keep in mind, if you do turn on your video, when they do the recording, they're just going to be spotlighting. I think I've got this right, just me and the PowerPoint, so you don't have to worry about everybody watching it later. So maybe that's a little more motivation to turn on your video. All right, so let me start by asking you a couple of questions. How many of you have ever gone into a difficult conversation really well prepared, and then the other person has a reaction that you didn't expect, and you can't even think about what to say? Like you go blank. Has that ever happened to anybody? Okay. Technically, I think almost everybody should have their hand up. All right. And have any of you ever gone into a difficult conversation, and the other person has a reaction, and instead of like kind of holding your ground, you end up backing down and not sticking with what was really important to you? Has that ever happened to anybody because you just wanted the pain to be over with? All right. And have any of you ever, this is my classic, had a situation where you're in a difficult conversation, you keep your cool, you keep your cool, you keep your cool, and then all of a sudden, that's it. You snap and you end up saying something that you regret, and now that becomes the issue, is that thing that you said. Has anybody ever done that? All right. And we are all in the right place because what we're going to talk about today is how to manage that. Okay, so I just want to, what can you guys see my PowerPoint right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I'm having trouble seeing it here, so I'm just I'm going to try and figure out what's going on here. All right. And so, what slide do you guys see? I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, then I'll start again. Okay, so just so you know how today is going to go, what we're going to do is at the end of the session, we are going to, this is how we feel, isn't it? You've had one of those conversations, it's like, oh, never again, no how, I'm not doing it. So just in terms of how today's goes, we're going to leave at least 15 minutes at the end to answer questions. There's often a lot of questions around this topic. And I do have some of the questions that people had sent in ahead of time, which I will try to address as best I can. Okay, but feel free to, if you have questions, to make notes of them to kind of keep them top of mind. So this is kind of what we're hoping for, right? Is that in the midst of sometimes these situations where things go sideways, that we can really stay calm and focused when things start to heat up, right? When emotions start to get going. And so we kind of want to keep this in mind. This is where we want to be coming from. All right. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to doing this work. This is my husband, and how I got into the whole realm of difficult conversations. So as many of you know, I was a lawyer by training and a courtroom lawyer on top of that. And I don't know if you know too many courtroom lawyers, but our training is very much about learning to not only put forward your case, but always thinking about what the opposing side is going to put forward, what their case is going to be, and to look for how you're going to poke holes in that, how you're going to make sure that you undermine their position. And our favorite thing of all as courtroom lawyers is when we get these situations where we get to cross-examine witnesses and catch them in inconsistent statements and all this kind of thing. This is like a great day, okay? Now, that works in the courtroom because you have a judge who then, hears all the evidence and weighs it and makes a decision. Now, the problem for me was I took this kind of a litigation or courtroom approach to my conflict in my marriage. So you can kind of imagine how that might have gone down, right? And my husband, he's not a shrinking wallflower either. And whenever we got into conflict, it was the situation where it was like really digging in our heels and proving who had the better case, who was right. And I had a little bit of the upper hand when it came to cross-examining because, that was my skill set. And you know what? So it became so that we could not actually even talk about some of these difficult issues. And we just started to avoid them. And things got kind of worse and worse and worse. And we are often referred to, and I kind of shrugged it off by friends or people kind of jokingly as the Bickersons, because it was sometimes these things leak out if you can't deal with them. And it all kind of came to a head for me when I turned 40. I was at my friends, Ann and Steve, I call them my 4 a.m. friends, over having a glass of wine one evening. And I was going on about the latest thing that Bill had done that irritated me. And I was going on about it. And I remember Ann just stopped me and she said, Di, I need to say this to you because I care about you so much. But when you're so negative, when you talk about Bill like that, it just makes you look bitter. And I know that you're not a bitter person. And I remember just even now when I think about it, I could just feel like my heart kind of in my throat. And then Steve, her husband, put his arm around me and said, we just love you so much, Di. We just want you to be happy. And I remember as I left their house that night, my boys at the time were 8 and 5. And I thought, what kind of role model am I for them if this is how I deal with conflict? And I decided I needed to take action. I needed to do something. So I'm definitely a person of action. I thought, well, 40 is kind of like a midlife crisis. Now I think that's much too young. But anyway, at the time I thought it was. And I thought, okay, well, what can I do? I need to do something different. I really need to change things up. And I decided to quit law. I thought about maybe being a mediator. I still thought I was this amazing communicator. And a friend of mine suggested I go do the executive coaching program at Royal Roads. So I trotted off down to Royal Roads in my navy blue suit thinking, yeah, I've got this figured out. I can do this. And when I got there, I realized that, very quickly that I was actually one of the most ineffective communicators. I was very good at pushing my point of view. I was very good at coming back with the quick comebacks, which usually end up causing us a lot of grief. But I wasn't really good about talking about those tough things and managing my reactions. And I decided that I needed to figure this out. And so, as they often say, you teach what you need to learn. And it set me on this journey when I went off to Harvard Law School to train there in difficult conversations and mediation, and read every book I could get my hands on. And I wrote a book called The Elephant in the Office. And so everything that I'm going to share with you, I have tested in my own life. Because to me, that's the school of hard knocks, right? Does this work? Because theory is one thing and testing it out is another. And I can say without a doubt, like learning to have these difficult conversations in a different way. And the biggest piece for me is like managing the reaction piece has been life-changing, to say the least. I'm still married, probably the couple most considered to be the most likely to get divorced. Is it perfect? No, but we can talk about the tough stuff. And manage the reactions. It transformed my relationship with my sister. And it's really been an incredible journey. And so I'm really excited about it. And when I started doing the work around difficult conversations, I often was so focused on the message, which is really important, but I wasn't really prepared for the reaction piece. And so that's why I like almost starting with this piece, because if we can manage our reactions, if we can have a plan to manage the other person's reaction, it gives us a lot more confidence to speak up. Okay. All right. So I want to just talk a little bit about what I like to call the difficult conversation defaults. So you all put your hands up for having those experiences when you ended up saying something you regretted or things went sideways, and you left that conversation kind of shaking your head and you said, that's it, never again, I'm not doing it, it's not worth it. That's happened to any of you? Is that you kind of give yourself that story? And so what we end up doing is we avoid, or sometimes not even so much avoid, we end up postponing. Okay. And when we postpone the conversation, what happens? What happens when you postpone the conversation? Do you just forget about it? Do you give it no thought? No, you're thinking about it. You're worrying about it. You're stressing about it. And it's something that's top of mind, right? And the kind of the pressure kind of builds and builds and builds. And so avoiding or postponing, it's kind of like almost prolonging the pain. Now, there are those times when we avoid and the situation kind of spontaneously resolves itself, but that's not very common. At least my experience has been problems don't usually get smaller, they usually get bigger, right? I always, what I'd like you to think about is think about a time when you avoided and it kind of came back to bite you, where you kind of, when you looked back, maybe when you eventually had the conversation and you thought, oh, I wish I had done this earlier. And if you think about one of those situations, what happened in that interim between the time that you thought about having the conversation and you had it? What was going on for you? If anybody wants to take their mute off and just share. It's pretty common.
Create a lot of stories in your head.
Yeah, right. You start building. Yes, thank you, Beth. You start building things up. And you start and you think about it. It's kind of like I like to call it the too hard to do pile. So it's here, right? And you keep thinking, oh, I'll deal with it tomorrow, right? Oh, I'll deal with it tomorrow. And then you have that sense of relief when it's like in the old days in the office, it's 5 o'clock, and you're like, oh, phew, don't have to do it today. I'll do it tomorrow, right? And then as you're driving home in the old days, right? Now you're like walking to your kitchen, but as you're driving home, you're thinking, oh, that sense of dread sets back in. Anybody else? What happens for you in that interim between the time when you just say, no, not going to do it?
Well,
Heather,
for me,
you? Yep.
for me, it just keeps on going in your head there. You can't just get it off your shoulders basically, and it just gets
Yeah.
heavier. And
Yeah.
then it just comes to bite you in the
And the behind
later on.
Right, because we build it up. So what I want you to do, the reason I want you to remember one of those situations is keep that in mind when you go to that kind of stage of thinking, I'm going to just avoid. It's not worth it. It doesn't really bother me. And remind yourself of when you have done that in the past and the price that you paid for it. Because that might help to give the motivation. I don't like to come from that place of shame, like, oh, I should do it, because then we just feel badly. But it's like we want to make the pain of not doing it greater than the pain of doing it, because that's the thing that's going to motivate us. And so if you kind of have that in mind, I remind myself of way back when I was a young lawyer. I had got a file from one of the scariest partners in the firm. And I remember it was like sitting on my credenza. I finally pulled out the file. And I realized we'd missed a date, a filing date. And my first reaction was, just terror and nerves. And how am I going to go and tell this person? And then instead of going up to his office to say, this is the situation, this is what I found, blah, 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 I sat there and I just kept thinking about it, and I started researching, did I really miss the date? And then I started thinking, well, when did I actually get the file? Is it really my fault? Is it somebody else's fault? And this went on for weeks. And when I finally went to say something to him, you can imagine what his first reaction is. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Why didn't you bring this up sooner? So avoiding, I believe, is probably, I think we have good reasons for avoiding because we've had these experiences where either the other person's behaved in a way that made us uncomfortable or we've ended up reacting. And so we have good reason. But if we have a plan, which is what we're going to talk about today, having some tools in your toolbox, then it's going to give you a much better chance. Is it going to be perfection? No, we're just trying to narrow the gap, right? Because the real key is we want to be able to, more often than not, respond versus react. We want to be able to respond versus react. We don't want to give our power away. And so I'd like you to grab a piece of paper, or if you're making notes on your computer, and just put down my top tools. Just write that at the top of the page, my top tools, and then we can start to jot down some things today. Because at the end of the 90 minutes, what I'd like you to do is walk away with 1, maximum 3 things that you're going to try. Small things, huge impact. Small things, huge impact. Okay. The second difficult conversation default that we tend to get into is the backing down. So here we've had the conversation, the person reacts in a way that makes us uncomfortable, or something happens. It feels so uncomfortable. We're just like, oh yeah, fine, that's fine. I'll take on that project that you just said no to. Or sure, yeah, no problem, no big deal. Or maybe you've shared with somebody how their behavior impacted you negatively, and they tell you completely misinterpreted them and that you're being way too sensitive, and you're like, yeah, okay, fine, no problem. And how do we end up feeling when we back down?
Feel like you're doing emotional labor and you have to deal with it on yourself.
Yeah, so you feel like emotional labor, you feel disappointed, right? There's so much. Sorry?
You feel unheard.
You feel unheard. You feel unheard. And the other thing too is that when we end up backing down, and there's some research around when you're dealing with like an angry negotiator, we're way more likely to give concessions because anger is uncomfortable. So we're actually at times when we end up backing down, and anybody who has kids, trust me, this is my backing down lessons over and over again, is we're actually sending the message, if you behave in a way that maybe we don't like, crying, screaming, yelling, threatening, whatever it might be, I'm going to back down. And so we're actually encouraging more of that behavior going forward. So you know what? We're going to get more comfortable, just like we were talking about presence last week. We're going to get more comfortable with awkward moments. Breathe. Okay, everybody take a deep breath in. Awkward moment. I'm good. All right, and the third one we talked about is the respond in kind, right? Where we escalate and nothing is solved. Where all of a sudden, and anybody who's in a relationship, I think we know about this, you come up with that little zinger. Wow, was that ever awesome in the moment? Wasn't it? And now it becomes about that thing that you said. And I'll never forget, my husband and I were having this conversation one night. It was, about stuff going on with the kids and who was going to do what and this, that, and the other thing. And he made some comment, well, this is how I interpret it. Well, I'm really busy and I have surgery tomorrow. And I'm just like, something snapped, right? Like we all have our things that make us snap. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't get the memo. God lives here. Whew. I was like, that was good. Well, it was good for that 1 second that I said it, right? And then it became about my bad behavior. Now, luckily, I was able to
I remember.
tell the story.
Yeah.
Sorry? Sorry, did somebody say something? I missed it. Okay. Anyway, so we had those moments of glory, and yet we end up we pay the price for it, right? My sister did have a good laugh at it the next day, so that was kind of fun. But really, it's not worth it because I had a legitimate thing, I had a legitimate concern, and it went out the window because I ended up getting that dig in. So here's the deal. Maybe you guys should write this down. I'm going to get you to write this down. Not having that perfect comeback, that thing that you wish when you leave that meeting that you'd said, be glad that you didn't. That's a good thing because that's probably the thing that you'd end up regretting. And you feel like this puppy.
You just repeat that?
Sorry, so this idea of we often will leave these conversations when we've ended up having a reaction or saying something, in that moment that we think, that we wish we hadn't said. And yet there's other times when we don't come up with that thing that we thought we should come up with, and we have all this regret, like I should have said this or I should have said that. Usually that's the thing you don't want to say. So I guess what I'm saying, I have trouble repeating. I forget what I say, but it's this idea of don't worry that you didn't have the perfect comeback. That's actually a good thing. You can always go back. You can always go back to say, I wanted to clarify this. You don't have to remember in that moment. So coming up with that perfect comeback is actually probably not serving you. So don't give yourself a hard time about it anymore. And if you need to go back to clarify, you can do that. You can do that. Okay, so just a couple of things. I think we've covered it off a lot about this, about avoiding, but we forget the cost of avoiding. And so it's just that reminder, right? It's the other thing that happens with avoiding. Does anybody have a friend who shows up late all the time? Anybody? Most of us do. And the thing is that, maybe you don't care, so you don't say anything, and that's fine. Or you decided to have a workaround. But if it really bothers you and you don't say anything, I'm just taking a simple example that we can all relate to. The resentment starts to build. The stories you start to say is, this person doesn't care about me. This person doesn't value my time. This person is da 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 da. But do. And you think, okay, well, I'm not going to say anything because it's not worth it. And I don't want to undermine the relationship. And I don't want them to be mad at me and blah, 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 blah. Right? We worry about the reaction, which is why we avoid. But what's happening is now all this resentment is building in the relationship, and it's going to end up leaking out, right? It's going to be that one moment when it's no big deal, and you're going to be like, I can't believe you're late again, or you don't respect my time, or we're going to come out with something, and the person will be like, whoa, what's your problem? Because it builds. It's also sending the message that that's okay to show up late. So there is a cost to avoiding. There is a cost to avoiding. Okay, the next question I want to ask all of you is, what is the reaction that you fear the most? So when you think about avoiding a difficult conversation, or maybe when you've backed down in the past, what's the reaction that you fear the most?
I would say not being liked.
Not being liked. Yes. That's a big one, right? We worry about, like, will this person like me? Especially for some of the questions came in about giving somebody some constructive feedback, right? What if this person doesn't like me? What if they're hurt? I don't want to upset them, right? And anybody else?
Rejection.
Rejection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a cousin, right? To not being like that. You might be rejected. What are some other ones that you fear, Barbara?
Saying something that I'm not going to forget, and they're not going to forget, that I wish I hadn't said.
Yeah. So it's that trusting of yourself, right? Am I going to end up saying something that I regret, or that's going to make things worse?
I think it's also negatively affecting the relationship.
You worry about negatively affecting the relationship.
So maybe things work out okay as long as conflict isn't raised. It kind of like goes smoothly. But as soon as it is, then it's not going to go smoothly anymore.
And so we have lots of good, like, fears, right? And yet, I think, and everybody has to weigh for themselves the risk-benefit ratio of having that conversation, right? Because there always is going to be that risk benefit. But I think what we do is we overblow what could go wrong. And because there's so much discomfort. And at times, because we overblow that, we end up letting things build, and it ends up becoming much worse, right? It becomes much worse because that person maybe doesn't know. And I think about a situation where it was somebody who's in a senior role, and this junior person said things were at the point where they got very abrupt and very short with staff when things got busy and stressful. And one of his staff members, who was kind of much lower on the totem pole, so to speak, sat him down in the right timing, in the right space to say, look, when you do this, right, it's the message you're sending to us is that you don't trust us, right? And we're in this with you. And this is a problem. And it was like a turning point because he had no idea. So I think it's that kind of that concept is like, and they stayed close friends. It opened up a whole new avenue for him to start to kind of check in about how things were going. Now, could that have gone wrong? It could have, but she'd made the decision that if she didn't say something, that she couldn't continue to work in that situation. So she had real reason for doing it. So I think nobody can make that decision except for you, but I think it's like that really being conscious of the cost of not speaking up. Okay. Because I think we spend so much time, should I, shouldn't I? I think we want to make that decision, which kind of leads me to the next point, which is asking yourself whatever that crucial question is about whether you want to say something. So this is kind of a next point that I find really helpful, and it kind of ties into what we talked about last week around presence, is really getting clear if you're going to speak up, why? Why does it matter? Because if, like Anita said, if things are just going along smoothly, it's not that big of a deal, you may actually choose to let it go. But if you're thinking about it all the time, maybe you haven't let it go. That's something to keep in mind too, okay? So what is a powerful question? What's a question you might ask yourself if you're kind of sitting on the fence? Should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? Does anybody have any ideas what might be a powerful question? One of the things I will ask myself is like, what happens if I don't? If I'm going to look down the road a week, a month, maybe even a year from now, am I okay if I don't say anything? Am I okay with the status quo? That might be a question. If you're talking about somebody who's reporting to you, you may ask yourself is, this question along these lines is, am I supporting this person in their development if I don't say anything? It can really be any question that helps you to decide. It could even be something like, is this aligned with my values? There's so many different questions, but the one that really resonates for me that I kind of come back to again and again is, if I look down the road, am I going to regret not saying something? There's a fellow out, he's Canadian as well. His name is Drew Dudley, and he's got a couple of great TED Talks. He's also written a book, and he talks about this idea of really like your leadership, living your leadership through your values. And one of the things that really struck me that he said is, you want to make the decisions or take the action that your future self will be proud of, right? The one that if you look back on maybe a year from now, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years are going to be, I'm really glad I did that. That was the one that, it's not always the most comfortable. So I want you to think about, for you, this isn't about shame. Again, it's about not shaming yourself into, I need to speak up. It's more like giving yourself a little bit of a way to make that decision. Does anybody have a powerful question that they've come up with that they would be open to sharing with the group?
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, something happened about 3 years ago. I should have said something. Is it too late?
Well, it depends. I usually say no, because I will often have people say, you know, that something happened and I never said anything. It's been bothering me. And yes, of course, the closer from the time of the event, whether it's feedback, whatever it is, and the time of the conversation, the better, right? Because memories don't fade. But I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, you know, this is something that happened and it's really bothered me. I've been thinking about it, and I just wanted to let you know this is what's been going on for me, and I wanted to share that with you. And this is probably one of the most important things we need to do then. I want everybody to do this. Because what do? Especially if we've been thinking about something for a long time, we say, you know what? This is something that's been bothering me. When we were at that meeting, or you know, when we were out together and you made that comment in front of people, I felt really humiliated. But we don't stop there. We go on. And you know what? Other people noticed it too. And actually, I just think blah, 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 blah. And you know what? You should know better. And I can't believe you did that. And we kind of lose the weight of it. Sound familiar? I see some nodding. And it's going to be difficult, but here's the great thing is less is more. We don't have to say as much. We don't have to think about all those brilliant things to say. Okay? All right. So it's really say what you need to say. So your powerful question really helps you get down to the why. Okay? Why do I need to do this? And I just think it's the thing that will, when you get into the conversation, the reason I'm spending a bit of time on this is if you get in that conversation, if you've really asked yourself that question, you think, okay, this is really important. Here's why. I care about this person's development, right? If they don't understand how they're coming across or what we're looking for or where they're going wrong, I'm not setting them up for success. And so this is really important so that then when you go into that conversation and you start to tell that person or share with them, here's some things I think that you could work on, right? Here's some concerns I have about, about what, how you're working on this project or whatever it might be. You're keeping that why in mind, why it matters. And so if the person gets defensive, and here's the news, they are going to get defensive. Period. Right? If they're human, if they have a pulse, as soon as we give people feedback, even if we say it in the perfect tone, in the perfect way, at the perfect time, chances are there's initially going to be some defensiveness as they grapple with what we say. It's human nature. And that's okay. Because then if you go back to your why, it's like, I'm telling this person because I care. And that is going to, I'm telling this because I care about their development. The same could be if you were going to somebody senior to say, I just need you to know this is how you come across at times. I don't think that's your intention, but here is how it's being perceived. I thought you deserved to know. And so if they say you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 if you can kind of reconnect with that why, it's like, look, this is what I'm seeing. Or, I just wanted you to know. Like, they can do what they want with it. Does that make sense? Okay. I still do this piece because I find if we don't really get clear, should I or shouldn't I, and why, if we decide to have the conversation, we get stuck in this spin cycle. And give me a thumbs up if this happens to you, of this spin cycle of what could go wrong, what am I going to say? We're lying in bed at night and we're thinking through everything, but we haven't actually made the decision if we're going to speak up or not. Does that happen to anybody? Okay. Is that a lot of energy? Yeah, and the stories start going. All right, so we want to try to reduce that, right? We want to try to reduce that. Okay, I just love this little slide. I like to show it. It's like, I always say, Diane, play the story to the end. Play the story to the end, right? And once I do that so many times, it will give me the courage to speak up about something. Okay. So we know that reactions scare us. We all have different reactions that scare us. We kind of are worried about our own potential reactions. So we need to have a bit of a plan. So now we're getting into some of the juicy parts. So far in our plan, what do we have in our toolbox? What do we have so far? Anybody share with me? Show me your piece of paper with what's in your toolbox so far.
So far, it's knowing why I'm doing this, so that I can be sincere and I can show like some caring and compassion as I am talking to them.
Yeah. And you know what? That really does it comes out, right? Like our nonverbal comes out through our body, right? Like even if we think we've got like the we're not giving the look or whatever, we are, right? For sure. Anybody else? What's in your toolbox so far?
Don't avoid.
Don't avoid. And instead ask yourself a
question.
What type of a question?
Powerful.
But I wanted to say, for me,
Yes.
My plan is listening and listen to clues, what the person is saying and how they might react.
Okay, and we're going to get into some of that with our reaction management plan now too. Okay, cool. So this idea of if we're really clear on why we're having the conversation. So I'm going to give you a simple example. This went to the late example. My best friend, we horseback rode together all through our childhood. And as we became professionals, we would still meet twice a week to go riding together. And I was always late. I was just one of those late people, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and this went on for about a month. And I will never forget, she sat me down after about a month and she said, you know what, we need to talk because, there's this pattern of you coming late when we're getting together. And right away, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm so busy. I've got this going on. I got that going on. She goes, I get it. I get stuff happens. But what I'm worried about is, at first, when you were late, I was just kind of, oh, okay. And then I started to think, oh, is there something wrong? Is Diane okay? And she said, and now what's happening is I'm starting to feel resentful. And I don't want to end up feeling resentful and having this come between us. And I went on about all my oh, well, this, that, and the other. She goes, Diane, I get stuff comes up. We're all busy. But I would hate for this to come between us so that I stop making plans with you. I feel like that's where it's heading. She didn't go on, right? I want everybody to do this. So we need to, one more time. Less is more. Less is more. I love it. Cool. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else like, oh, I just want to share what's in my toolbox so far. All right, let's move on. Now you're like, come on, let's get to the good stuff, Diane. Let's get to the juicy stuff. Okay, let's shake it out. All right, reaction management plan. Let's talk about what your reaction management plan is going to be. And it's whatever it is for you that works, right? It's different for all of us. So first of all, why does it matter? And so this kind of goes back to what Barbara was talking about, how if we don't have a reaction management plan, so DC stands for difficult conversation. So we have the difficult conversation. Now, sometimes obviously reactions come at you when you haven't planned it. So a lot of these tools will help with that as well. They have a reaction, right? They react, and right away, right, we react, right? We treat social threats the same as we treat a threat of a pit bull chasing you, a grizzly bear, whatever it be. Our brain doesn't know the difference, right? So they react, and it's like this instinctual amygdala hijacked, and we retaliate, right? Or we react back, right? Rather than responding. And we get into this vicious circle, goes around and around and around and around and around. And then sometimes you totally forget what your goal is, right? The problem can reoccur, repeat conversations, and we get into this kind of like, you could almost think about being stuck in the flush cycle in your toilet, right? It just goes around and around. So we want to avoid this. I don't know if any of you have ever had this situation, but a girlfriend and I, we went to law school together. We still laugh about this. We had some kind of a disagreement or fight in just before our grad. And I remember we didn't speak. I remember how I felt. I remember how upset I was. I remember crying that night. I remember we didn't go together in the limo. She remembers all that. Neither of us can remember what it was about. But we sure remember how we felt, because we got stuck in this cycle. We got stuck in this cycle. We don't want that, right? So instead, we want this. Using our tools to stay cool that can help us to avoid reacting, right? Clarify as needed, what have you. Or as Elke talked about, that whole thing of listening, right? Knowing that that person is going to have a reaction. That's pretty normal if you're sharing difficult news, right? Or you're asking, or you're sharing something that somebody could do to grow, or you're sharing how their behaviors negatively impacted you. That's another big one, right? People are going to be potentially go to that place of you're being too sensitive, or you've misinterpreted me. It's like, right? My why was to make sure that I share with them the impact for me. It wasn't to get into an argument if I was too sensitive or not. This is your internal dialogue. We don't want to say that out loud. Okay. All right, so we're going to go through some secrets and and I want to share a few things. So the first secret, which we kind of already alluded to managing reactions, is this idea of anticipating the negative reaction. Kind of like when we talked about presence last week, we spend so much time preparing, right? If you're going in to have a difficult conversation, which is important. I'm not saying it isn't important, but we don't really think about, how might this person react? What might be their response? If I was in their shoes, how would I react? Now, a great place to practice this is with people you're close with, because you kind of have a pretty good idea of how they're going to react, right? So it gives you a better chance of success. It also prevents you from being ambushed or like kind of taken aback by the reaction, right? It's kind of that idea of, I don't want to be a pessimist, but if you prepare for the worst, right? Expect the best. I think it was Zig Ziglar said that, and capitalize on what comes. It's that idea of, if you're ready for it, then when it happens, you're not like the deer in the headlights or kind of like stunned. It's more like, oh, yeah, that's kind of what I expected. Taking that sting out of the reaction can help us to stay focused on the why. Now, some of you might be feeling a little like skeptical. This is pretty basic, and it is basic, right? It is basic, but it's an elegant solution. So as I said, I like to always test these things out. So in early days, this idea came up of anticipating the reaction as I was learning this. I was thinking, I don't know about that, so I'm going to test it out. And it was shortly after I had left the practice of law. I was pursuing this new career, whatever that was going to be. I wasn't really sure what it was yet. And, my kids were young, so I was trying to like manage the kids, sort of like what everybody's doing in the pandemic now, manage my kids, start my new career, I still managed the household more. And I'd had a couple of conversations with my husband about getting more support and what have you, and nothing had really changed. And I was kind of avoiding it because I didn't want to end up in a big fight, right? This was, as many of us do, we avoid these things. And I thought, okay, I need to talk about this because this is actually getting in my way of me being able to really put the time in to launch my career. And so I was super nervous, right? We don't have to not be nervous. And I was like, okay, I'm going to anticipate the reaction. If I bring this up, this topic of feeling like I'm not getting enough support, how is he likely going to react? I know this man pretty well. I had a pretty good idea. So I'll never forget. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I got my courage up. I said, look, you know what? I know we've talked about this before. But from my perspective, I'm just not getting the support that I need from you to really launch this career. And this is really important to me. Awkward pause. And then he said, that is totally unfair. I can't believe you would say that. I am way more supportive than most guys. This is where my inside voice is going, really? I don't think so. Like, I'm thinking about this person and that person. And I'm like wanting to come back. The lawyer in me is wanting to come back with all these comebacks. I'm like, right, Diane, remember, anticipate the reaction. Your why is to have a productive conversation about support. I said nothing. I think I was actually looking at my feet because I was afraid I was going to say something. And I just kept quiet. And he's like, that's totally unfair. And I am so supportive. And, blah, 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 blah. And this went on for probably only about 2 minutes. And you know what? A lot of what he was saying is true. Like, he is supportive. His mom was a career woman. He is supportive of that. But for me, I was not getting the support I needed. It would have been so easy to get into a huge fight that would have blown out of control. But because I anticipated it, I just held my ground. And literally within 2 minutes, he said, well, what do you need from me? What does support look like? Let's talk about something specific. And then we ended up having this conversation. And I was like, okay, this works. This really can work. Because the anticipation, then when it happens, it's like understanding like, oh, it's normal for people when they feel like their status has been threatened or that they're like somehow questioning their integrity or kind of something that they value who they are, that they may have that initial defensive reaction. And I've had so many clients say to me, this is something that just seems so It's so simple, yet it is so powerful. I worked with a young MBA student, and she said to me that this really changed her life, this idea about anticipating. She used to work on a project with one particular person, that project, when things would go wrong, or they had a number of projects, his reaction was anger, right? Fear turned into anger, and would say, well, kind of like get really upset, and you need to fix this, and you need to do this. And she said, I would be like, oh my goodness, yes, yes, yes. And she said, I would take it all on and I would do the work. And then she said it would take days to recover from that stress of that encounter. And she said when she learned this idea about anticipating the reaction, she said it was like the next time it came, so it wasn't like she was bringing up a difficult conversation. She was just like, I was just able to kind of just stay grounded and say, oh, right, this is kind of what I thought might happen. I'm okay. And took a deep breath and then said, you know what? Yeah, we've got some issues here. Let's figure out who's going to do what. And just calmly then dealt with the problem. Now, I'm guessing that some of you might be thinking this. Okay, that's fine. But if that person's behavior is inappropriate, don't I have to deal with it? Is anybody thinking that? Any hands? Thumbs up? Maybe, not so much. And I'm just going to cover up from this perspective is that, you know what, if you need to go back, now I'm seeing some thumbs coming, if you need to go back, that's okay. You can go back. Maybe at that time, especially if the person is really, if they are angry, if it's not just garden variety kind of defensiveness, that might not be the time to do it. They might not be able to hear it. And there's nothing wrong with, like, one of the questions was, is it okay to come back later? Absolutely. Say, you know, I'd like to talk about how we had that interaction and bring it up from that perspective. So this idea about anticipating, it's almost like, this is the other example I give, it's that surrendering to what is it, like a keeper hole. Apparently when you kayak, keeper holes are like in the water where the water goes down like this. And the tendency is like to, when you get into one of those, is to fight against it. And yet the way to survive it is to actually go down with it and then get shot up somewhere else. And so I kind of think about that way. If you're anticipating that there's going to be a few of those I think they're called keeper holes, that are going to pull you down, just be like, okay, it's okay. And I'll get shot up, right? And then I can deal with it. I can then reconnect with, why am I having this conversation? Why is this important? Why is what I'm saying matter? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So this anticipate the reaction. And you know what? Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes things come out of left field. Absolutely. I know one of the questions that came in beforehand is, what if something does come out in left field and you didn't anticipate it? You're completely taken aback. And I think then in those cases, we sometimes will go into our own fight or flight, and it may be just actually even just being transparent about, you know what, especially if somebody wants us to come up to react to have a response, to say, I need some time, right? Or I'd like to think about that, get back, or I'm taken by surprise. Let me get back to you on that. It's okay to carve out that time. It's okay to do that, especially if you're feeling reactive. One of the women in my mediation group said, she said one time, you know what? Things seem like they're getting out of control here, and I feel like I'm like hanging from a cliff, right? And I don't want to fall. So let's just, like, you know, being really transparent. I don't know where she went from there. Kind of like, let's just like come back. Let's revisit this. It's okay to do that. Remember that reacting, we're giving up our power when we react. We're still going to do it sometimes, but this is going to be something that's going to help us. It's going to help to bring down when we anticipate, giving them the space, but it's also going to help us from that perspective as well. Okay, does that make sense? All right. And if it doesn't happen, if you're prepared for it, beauty, right? But here's the deal. Here is the deal when it comes to difficult conversations. People are like, okay, I want to have the conversation. I want the other person to be happy. I want everybody to feel good. And I want it all to tie up with a bow, and everything's great. And there's no hard feelings right away. And so we try to soften it and make it nice and all of that good stuff, but then the message doesn't get heard. It usually takes a little bit of time for it to sink in, for people to think about it, right? I just, even that example with my girlfriend, you know, at first I was kind of defensive, but after I thought about it and I went back and went, okay, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so don't expect it to tie up with a bow right there. Does that make sense? In fact, if it has tied up with a bow, then it probably, maybe you haven't really said what you needed to say. That's kind of what I say to myself. I know this is going to be awkward. I know it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. And that's okay. If it's somebody who you know, that's maybe reporting to you, it's like, I care enough about this person's development. That's why I'm sharing it. Okay. So that's secret number one. One big piece of that is letting go of the expectation of that positive reaction, like we talked about. All right, so secret number two, which is kind of related to secret number one, is this idea of giving the other person the floor. Okay, now just through kind of like, without even thinking about it, this was kind of what I did in that conversation that I had with my husband. I gave him the floor. Right? I didn't interrupt. I didn't interject. I didn't say this is wrong, that's wrong, this, that, the other thing. One of my favorite authors, William Ury, he wrote, I think I pulled the book out. He wrote, he was one of the authors of Getting to Yes. Then he wrote a book called Getting Past No. I actually haven't read that book. And then he wrote this book, The Power of a Positive No. And it's an amazing book, really easy to read, which is an inspiration for a lot of things that I did and kind of followed up on. And, you know, he talks about sending the message that you're okay with the reaction, whatever it is. Now, having said that, obviously, if you feel like you're in danger or you don't feel safe, like by all means, we need to remove ourselves, right, from the situation. But that idea of sending the message, like giving them the space to kind of wrestle with whatever it is. And so many times when we do that, and I keep seeing this happen in my life over and over again, when I hold that space for the person, even if it's uncomfortable, is that how oftentimes that they end up coming around. Oh, okay, well, tell me more about that. Maybe not necessarily right then, but a lot of times that they do. The more comfortable we can get, right, with the reaction and giving them that space to process, the more likely we are to be able to really make sure our message is heard. Okay. So the other thing too, and this is hard, this is difficult when somebody's having a negative reaction, is to really listen. And so I think the key is, and I've kind of already done this with, we say what we need to say and then really turn it over, right? Give them that space to let them process what you've said. And here's the thing is, if we can really listen below the surface of what they're saying, we might be able to really understand where they're coming from. Sometimes we're just managing our own reactivity and all we can do is just hold the space, and that's okay too, right? It might not be listening in the way that we think about listening, that we can really acknowledge and hear what they're saying and dig down. You know, sometimes we can, but if we are feeling reactive, even if we can just like kind of take that time to breathe and give them that space. So I want to give you an example of how I share a little anecdote of how I did this, because it makes it more real than just these concepts. So this is again back in my lawyer days, and I had worked with a fellow who came in one day, and he, really great boss, we got along great, and he brought a file in and it was going to trial the next week, and it hadn't been my file, and I loved going to trial. That was something I really enjoyed. So he plopped it on my desk and said, this is going next week. It's a pretty small case, you know, I'd like you to do it. And I was like, awesome. So I started to go through this file and I'm reading through the documents, and I realized that there's a number of things in this file that had come from another associate, where some you know, there's certain requirements through the rules of court that you have to file certain documents by a certain time frame and what have you. There was a lot of things that were not done in this file. And I started to look at this and said, okay, even if I work 24/7 between now and the trial date, I can't rectify these things. And when I kind of went back to that, I didn't ask myself a powerful question at the time, but we all have these cases where we've done this. I was like, if I take this and I do this, I am putting my reputation at stake. I can't do that. I'm not prepared to do that. And so I remember walking down the hall to his office and kind of knew he'd be pretty, we've all had those situations where we've anticipated. I thought he was going to be pretty upset. And he was, right? I said, like I've gone through the file. Here's all the issues. I'm not comfortable not comfortable. I'm not prepared to take it on. And his reaction is, well, we are team players around here, and that's the expectation, and blah, 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 blah. And whew, did I ever want to react to all of that? And I was like, just hold the space, right? He's just grappling with what's he going to do? How's he going to deal with this? The problem is now back in his lap. And I just said, I get it. I hear where you're coming from, and I'm not prepared to put my reputation on the line. I really kept reconnecting with my why. And I walked back to my office thinking, oh dear, this is not good. And literally, I think it was within maybe an hour or so, he came back to my office and he said, you know what? I've read through everything. I hadn't gone through the file. I understand where you're coming from. I will manage this. I will handle it from here. And I've had so many other times when somebody got upset like that, I backed down. I agreed to do something that ended up putting me in a precarious situation. And it was just, to me, that's just that reminder of how that works. That giving them that space, right? Now, if we can really, stay grounded, then we can really listen to try to understand where they're coming from. But we're not always going to be able to do that. We're not always going to be able to do that. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts about this idea of giving them the floor? Okay. I'd like you to grab your little paper with your tools. What tools have you got so far? Jot down anything that has resonated for you. Maybe it's something you already do. You're recommitting to do. I always love to share this little diagram here, right? You see this in many forums in different places, but this idea of, and you could take this for anything, like something happens or the person has a reaction, and then we put meaning based on our own experience to what that reaction means. That's disrespectful, that's inappropriate, that's this, it's that, it's the other thing, right? And depending on the story we tell, we're going to feel something, right? So imagine this situation. I go to say to somebody, maybe they spoke to me in a way that I experienced as disrespectful, right? So I'd say, when we were in that meeting and you made that comment, or I'm not sure if you're aware of it, you interrupted me and spoke over me and said, we don't need to hear anything from you, Diane. I was really taken aback because I had some important things that I wanted to share with the group. And then the person's reaction is, well, actually, I didn't do that. And I think that you're being way too sensitive. And maybe I think you're overreacting. And you just need to grow thicker skin or something along those lines. Now, I get to choose the meaning that I make of that. Now, I could say this person's, I can have all sorts of things that I might call them, right, in my brain. Or I could say, okay, this is uncomfortable for this person to hear. Because they don't want to see themselves as being disrespectful or rude or whatever it might be. And so the emotion that I'm going to feel based on that story are going to be different, right? Because I'm like, okay, this person is having trouble grappling. This is hard for them to hear. I may be more curious versus righteously indignant, angry. Now, easier said than done. I'm not saying this is an easy thing, but it gets easier, and it kind of surprises me sometimes how I'll be in the middle of like a difficult conversation, or that's something that's all of a sudden become difficult, and then the reaction I'm getting is, okay, the old Diane would have been like, this is rude, this is disrespectful, look out. You've now just triggered the lawyer. Or it's like, oh, this is so interesting. They're just kind of grappling with this. And it's kind of rude, but I'm, I kind of get it. And that's going to impact my emotions, which is going to impact my actions. And I know you've probably seen a variation of this, but it's just that reminder that we have so much more, we have so many more tools than we realize, because we've all done this. You've all done this before, where you've told yourself a different story, right? And that has had an impact that's been more positive. Now, this person may say all of this, like, oh, you're just overreacting, you're being too sensitive, you need to grow tough skin, whatever it is. I can just take that deep breath, reconnect with my why. What was my why? My why is to let them know how their behavior impacted me. I just say, look, I needed you to know that was my experience. Just calmly go back to reiterate that. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful. Okay, give them the floor. The other thing too is when we let people say what it is they need to say, they're more likely to hear us then, right? Instead of us getting into that whole competition thing, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And holding that space does not mean that we are agreeing, right? It's this idea around acknowledging somebody's perspective or acknowledging their feelings. Or, I get that you don't think what I'm saying is fair, or it sounds like you have a different perspective, and this is what I need you to know. It doesn't mean that we're agreeing. And I think that's a really, really big thing, because for me, that was a tough one. It's like, well, if I'm letting them say a bunch of things that aren't true, or that don't, they aren't true to me, blah, 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 even though I go back to the story with my husband and I around having that conversation around support, I could be like, well, some of the things he was saying isn't true. My girlfriend's husband does more, da, 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 da. Am I agreeing? Well, first of all, it doesn't matter. In that case, it doesn't matter. Other times it may matter. But for there, it was keeping my eye on the prize, which was to have a productive conversation. And so I could let that go. Sometimes there may be things you need to go back to address. Does that make sense? But it doesn't mean because you give them the floor that you're agreeing with what they say. Deep breaths. Remember our why. Okay, let's shake it out. We've been here for over an hour. Everybody shake it out, shake it out, shake it out. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Dance in your chair. I want to see some movement. Let's do it. Okay, and now thumbs back. I've been learning this in restorative yoga. Thumbs back. That helps with your posture, right? Because we're all getting those slumped shoulders. Excellent. And then let's take a deep breath in. And a big warrior breath out. Ah, and again. And out. Ah, okay. What do we have in our toolbox? What do we have so far? You can even show me your pieces of paper with your toolboxes. We're going to go for that now. We're going to practice the awkward pause. What's your number one thing in your toolbox right now? I can't really check the chat because I'm trying to look at all of you. Heather.
Say it.
Yeah, my first one is less is more.
Ah, a lesson that keeps giving for me. For sure.
When I
Right?
heard, as you said it, it came back to me what Gottman says in his writings as well too, and it's this concept of I see you and then you see me. So it's really listening to understand the other person and being accepting and respectful, and then talking about what I feel, so that they listen to understand, and they're accepting and respectful of me. Not that we agree, as you said, but that we're accepting and respectful of how each other feels.
Yeah, love Gottman's work. Love it. And I think it's that idea too, that if they can empty, especially if you're the one initiating the difficult conversation, if they can empty their cup, right, then they're more likely to be able to hear what you've had to say. And sometimes this is where taking the high road is kind of the sometimes difficult if it's not reciprocated, right? If you're taking the high road, right, to listen, understand, but it's not being reciprocated, that's when you're really challenged. And so it's maybe turning this, okay, this is into a challenge for me to actually stay present. Along those lines, there's a really amazing mediator. Her name is just escaping me at the moment. And she used to call it, like, when people get upset or angry, it's called a dumpster diving, right? When they're having a reaction, there's something there, right? Because there's all this energy. So you got to dive into the dumpster and figure out what it is. So that's just a little visual. For me, if I find, like, if you do feel that reaction, it's that idea of, okay, in this moment, I just need to kind of create some space so I can come back. Okay. Now I want to talk about, so we've got number one, anticipate the reaction. Number two of the tools is to give them the floor. Number three is having some of these tools to stay cool. And the first one is name that hook. Now, these tools to stay cool, they're kind of like something you have in your back pocket. So if you take like a little, I don't know, you can take a Q-tip, take your whatever, take something, maybe you write on a little note, something, you want to remind yourself of, I'm calm, I've got this, I'm good. Stick it in your pocket. It's sort of like these tools to stay cool are will show up unexpectedly when you need them most. All right. So the first one is name that hook. Now, this is not something you do out loud. Aha, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to guilt me into saying yes. It's not going to work on me. That's what I did at first when I kind of learned this concept. I was like, I would say this out loud. So this is definitely something you say to yourself. Okay, so we're going to play a little game. Are you guys ready? Are you ready? All right, I'm going to throw a hook out there and I want you to tell me what it is. Okay? Oh, you know what? I'm looking right at Christina, so I'm going to say Christina. Christina, you know what? You're the only one who can do this project. And I so need you to do it. And I know you've got all these other things on your plate, but if you don't do it, it's just not going to get done. What's the hook?
Flattery or guilt?
Yeah, kind of both. Flattery or guilt, right? Or it can be, some of the other types of hooks are, if it's something that's related to how we like to see ourselves. So if you see yourself as somebody being really fair, right, and giving everybody equal opportunity, the person's like, you know what, you're so unfair. You're totally playing favorites, Barbara. You're playing favorites, and I just can't believe it. Like, you're favoring Kathy over me. The hook is going after like this piece of your identity, right? People who know you well know how to go for those, right? So instead it's like, okay, they're going after my fairness. I don't need to, because what is our gut reaction? What do we want to do? We want to defend it. Oh, I'm fair. Let me show you all the ways that I am fair. And we might as well go get a can of gas, put it on the fire, right? Because then we're adding all these other complicated things and we're going all over the place. So think about some of those things right now. What are some of those identity things? Is it fairness? Is it integrity? Is it your hard work? I mean, none of us want to think competence is another one, right? If we think somebody's questioning our competence, but something about our character that really matters to us. That's where we'll often get hooked. So I want you to think about right now, think about a time when you did get hooked. You ended up saying something you regretted or you backed down. Was there a piece of it that felt like that you reacted because it was like a personal attack? It was something that you kind of hold true and dear to yourself. Does that make sense? for me, a big one is selfish, right? If somebody says something about that, what I'm doing is selfish, it is just like red flag in front of the bull, right? Because I don't like, that's something that there was a whole host of reasons I don't need to get into, but for me, it's like, I have to be, oh, interesting. Okay. I'm getting hooked here. So that naming it in your head, of course, we're not naming it out loud. It gives you, first of all, gives your inside voice a job to do, but then it also helps you to what? Stay focused on what? What do we want to stay focused on?
Your why.
Your why. Like your why. Why does this matter? Why do I care? Why am I telling this person? Why am I sharing this? And so you can stay focused on what matters, right? And sometimes it feels like, okay, this person is doing everything they can. We've all been in situations to get me to have some kind of a reaction. I get to choose, right? It kind of goes back to the story from, it'll come back to me in a second. I can't think of his name. I'm having a problem with names today. Okay, let's go on to the next tool, okay? The next, Viktor Frankl, thank you very much, so has anybody read Man's Search for Meaning? That book? If not, you've probably heard of Viktor Frankl. Was a very famous psychiatrist who was in, I believe, Auschwitz and another concentration camp. And he wrote a book afterwards and talked about how he managed that horrific situation, right? This idea that between the stimulus, which was the mistreatment, the torture, whatever it is, and the response, that part in between, that ability to choose the meaning is where the power is. And I often like to remind myself, if he could do that in those situations, he talks about in his book how when he was being tortured, he would imagine himself giving a lecture, right? Take himself out of that situation, that the Nazis could not take his dignity. And it's just that reminder that, oh, wow, if I get to actually choose the meaning of this, I get to choose. And it's just a great reminder. Okay, so first tool is the hook, being aware of what our hooks are. Really think about those things that you hold dear, true and dear to yourself, right? And maybe even like, and kind of be aware of those. Be aware of those. Okay, the second one, and I love this one. I have a little cards like this with my little elephant dot on them to remind me, have a calming mantra, okay? Because what happens is, and we want to make sure we frame it in the positive, right? So if you say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, you're going to think about the don't react, don't get defensive, don't think about elephants, don't do this. It's hard to not do a don't, right? So we want to frame it in the positive. So what might be something that you say, okay, if all else fails, if I feel like, oh, and I'm going to say something I regret, or I'm starting to feel I'm getting triggered, you want to give your prefrontal cortex something to do, right? We want to have something that we say like, this is what I expected. I've got this. Breathe. I'm okay. I'm focusing on my why. Really, it could be endless. But I'm really going to encourage you to take a little piece of paper, put my mantra on it, maybe even get like a little, like something small, write it down. You could change it, stick it in your pocket. Next time you're going into a difficult conversation or you're anticipating a difficult conversation, and just knowing it's there, it will come to you in those moments that you need it. But it's kind of like the hook. You don't want to say it out loud. A friend of mine said to me, oh, what you do is you say wow every time the person reacts in a way you don't expect. And I started saying that out loud. That did not work out too well. So I don't suggest that you do that. Okay. And we talk about framing it in the positive. And then the third of the tools in the toolbox, and this is inspired from William Ury, is watch the drama rather than getting into the drama. He talks about in his book, going to the balcony. This idea of go to the balcony, let the drama unfold, and then wait for your opportunity to step back in. I kind of like to think of it as, you know, when you go to a restaurant and you see two people kind of going at it, they're having a fight, and you can look at it very dispassionately, and you can kind of see it from both perspectives. It's almost a little bit like that. So the idea of, rather than getting into it, kind of stepping out. Now, I want to share with you one of my all-time favorite, because I want to get to questions, one of my all-time favorite little tricks I have is what I call my Teflon suit. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you might think about this being, you know, ducking those bludgers, right? But this idea of sometimes you just got to have in your little pocket, and I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to pull out my Teflon suit. I'm going to put it on. Okay. I want all of you to put on your Teflon suits. And what happens when you have a Teflon suit on? When stuff comes at you, you're rude, you're disrespectful, you don't understand me, you're this, you're that, blah, 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 blah. What does it do? Does it stick to us? No, it slips off of you. So you always want to have your Teflon suit handy so you can imagine putting on when you need to. And the thing that I say to myself is, Diane, when I'm putting on my Teflon suit, do the opposite of what your instincts tell you to do. Because in those moments when I'm feeling triggered, my instincts are going to be to lash out, to back down, to run, and that's not going to serve me. So the Teflon suit, one of my favorite tips. Wanted to share this slide with you that somebody shared with me and said, you are welcome to use it when they came to one of my talks, talking about the natural response is the feedback or the difficult conversation. You know, you get a little bit of a reaction, and then you have a reaction, they have a reaction. So we kind of get into that whole react, retaliate thing, or we exit stage left, right? Doesn't really get us where we want to go, all right? And versus the other situation being that you give the feedback, there's a reaction, you hold that space, you know, you bring in your tools to stay cool. It's not about not then going back and repeating what you needed to say or to kind of like to stick with the message, but it's not getting sucked into that vortex. Okay, all right. So let's get, we're going to get to some questions. I just want to share this with that reminder that no matter how somebody reacts, no matter how much they try to pull you in, we get to choose. We get to choose how we react. And that is a very powerful, powerful place to come from. Okay. And I just have to share these because it kind of comes under the whole superhero theory theme, which I'm really into. That's my now 300-pound son who power lifts. And to remind him of his superhero strength that we can do this. And then I took a picture of myself when I was 3 and turned it into to remind myself of that kind of courage that I had as a little kid. Because this takes courage to have these conversations. It takes courage not to react in the face of a negative reaction. Okay, so I want to turn it over to all of you for questions. And if you could just turn off your mics. If you have any questions. Beth.
Diane, do you set up the situation and ask for permission first to have the conversation and provide feedback?
That's a really good question. And I think that, you know, here we're talking about one part of the whole package of difficult conversations. And I think there's a lot out there just to prepare the brain to be ready for it, is to say, you know what, I have something I want to talk to you about, or can we talk about what happened in the meeting? Because then it signals to the brain that the feedback is coming. So I think rather than just kind of blasting in there with it, I think that could be really important for sure to do that. Now, of course, the flip side of that is that the person says no. I remember my sister did this with my brother one time. Can I talk to you about something? He's like, no. And then she forged ahead, right? So we have to be prepared for that. So the other question that can come up is, well, what if this person says no? And you need to talk to them, you're managing them. And then it may be, you know what, if this isn't a good time, that's fine, but get back to me with a time, because we, you know, in the next couple of days, because I'd like to sit down and have a conversation with you.
Okay,
so we may need to do that. Yeah, great question. One of the other questions that came up just on the list here while you're thinking about if you have a question is, how do you talk to, say, somebody who you're reporting to about a difficult situation, like somebody who you think, maybe a long-term employee or somebody that maybe is no longer a good fit, that there's some concerns. And I think when we're having those kinds of conversations, it's that same kind of thing, being ready for the reaction, but painting the picture, right? In terms of, ultimately, this is where you want to watch, not interfering with that person's status. Like, ultimately, you need to make this decision, but here's the concern I have. Here's the fallout that I see that I want to bring to the table. So I think when somebody else gets to make that decision, when we go into convince mode, people go into dig their heels in. Whereas we come from that place of, here's my concern, and here's the potential impact, right, of keeping this person. And I just, ultimately you need to make this decision, but I wanted to bring this to your attention. I know I've done that before when I've had to deal with somebody who ultimately had to make the decision. They've tried to turn it back on me to say, well, this is just your issue and yada, 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 yada. And I was like, well, you know what? It is an issue I have. And this is also what I've been hearing. This is the concern I have. Ultimately, it's your decision. So I just wanted to cover that off. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question. I'll just turn on my video. It's Andrea here.
Oh, Andrea, hi.
Hi. Quick example. I had a shareholder I was working with for 10 years, and her default mode was yelling, screaming, anger, because again, it gave that example that you said before where everybody else backed down from her, right?
Yeah.
So when I would share how her situation would make me feel and things like that, she just then viewed me as weak, and then continued, knowing that I found that confrontation or those difficult situations when she got like that, she then used that all the time because she knew. So I was trying to take the high road by not kind of, engaging in that and lashing back, but just saying, hey, when you do this, this is how, it makes me feel. And then she would use that anger then as a tool and power. And I never figured out how to get over that.
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky for sure, right? And so I think once we've shared our feelings, there is risk with that. And so it may come to the point where it's, and you never know who you're dealing with, right? Whether you're dealing with a high conflict personality. So some of these tools, like a lot of the tools I'm talking about, we're talking about neurotypical kind of behavior, right? For sure. So it's like, what are your boundaries then around that, right? So maybe it doesn't feel safe any longer to say, this is how it makes me feel. It may be, you may actually, a lot of times I'm really careful that word respect, because it's kind of like, it's a little bit of a red flag if you say you're not being respectful, but I think there are signs we can come to the place like, I don't believe the way that you're speaking is respectful. I'm going to ask you to not speak to me that way. Or you just don't give it that energy. But it's like, it's a tricky one, right? In terms of what your boundaries are around that, because you've tried I'm going to share how this makes me feel, and this is the impact. And so it might be like, what is my boundary? You don't even have to necessarily articulate a boundary. A boundary maybe I'm not just not letting that stuff in. Mm-hmm. Or that boundary maybe I'm not comfortable with the way you're speaking with me, or could I ask you to please lower your voice? It may get more of it. I don't know, but sometimes just that standing up can make a difference. But I think, that's a tricky one for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of times I just think, what's my boundary in terms of when I deal with people like that? I'm going to limit how much I'm around them, which obviously sometimes you can and can't do.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Any other questions? I'm just going to look here on my list to see if there's anything else I didn't. So somebody talked about, there is definitely this idea of, somebody said, how do you help leaders manage their triggers and reactive emotions that happen in the moment? And I think sometimes it's just sharing, if you can share what you kind of like, what's in it for them, that idea of sharing like how that reaction is impacting people, and maybe just even sharing a couple of these tools. Here's something that I've tried that's worked, could be a helpful thing as well, right? Depending on the person, right? And here's the complicated thing is like, people are complicated, right? There's 4 of us that show up to a conversation. There's you, there's your inside voice, there's the other person, there's inside voice, right? So it can get very complicated, right? So we can only control this part. Okay, any other questions We have time for maybe one or two more. Are there any questions in the chat, Karen?
Just one more. I got one
sure.
more.
Go ahead, Beth.
It's Beth
Hey,
here.
go for it.
Just wondering if you've read the Crucial Conversations book.
I have.
And any feedback on that?
There's so many good books, right? There's Crucial
Yeah.
Conversations, there's Difficult Conversations, there's Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor.
Yes,
there's
right.
a lot, and she's got a great video. There's so much good stuff out there. What I found, Crucial Conversations is probably one of the first books that I read before I decided to write my own book. And I could never remember for me, it was like, there's a lot of steps to remember, right? So that's why I really encourage people to, and then you're thinking, it's kind of like when we talked last week about presence, you're thinking about the thing that you didn't do that you were supposed to do. And I mean, we definitely need a structure. Absolutely. Like I have kind of a 4-part structure. It's like the preparation, the message, the manage the reactions, and then the responding, not reacting, the kind of that piece of it. So I think what I just suggest with any of those books is, like, when you walk away, take 1 or 2 things, try them on for size, try them on for size, try them on for size, right? And then take something else, because there's a lot of really good things for sure in there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly what you're saying. I'm like, there's a lot of steps here.
There's a lot. Yeah. And so that's why I always just keep going back to, because it's kind of, then you just, with so many things, you just give up, right? So if last week we did presence, okay, now you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this, you're gonna stand here, you're gonna do that, and then you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. It's like, oh my goodness. Like your brain, we can't remember all those things. It's too much. It's too much. So let's add one thing, add another. Okay, let's finish with this. You can write it down, or you can hold it up. I want you to write down 1, maximum 3 things that you're going to try on for size that we talked about today. 1 to 3 things. Just even if it's just experimenting. And then once you've done that, turn it into like a commitment. I am committing to try out blah. 1, maximum 3. Okay. Anybody want to share before we sign off? Any brave person? Don't worry, the video, video isn't being pinned forever.
I'll share. It's Kathy Enright.
Kathy, excellent.
I think let it go. That's a tough one for me. So I'm just saying, I'm going to try that. Just let it go.
From what perspective? Let it go as in when the person's having a reaction, let it go.
Yeah, let it go, because I'm more I would engage. You know. It's the
cool. There's your mantra. Put that on a card. Let it go.
Yeah,
right?
It's
almost like I'm taking the high road, right? Cool. Somebody said give something and give them the floor. Oh, does that say shut up? No. What was the first part, Barbara? Oh, Barbara, you're on mute.
Button up.
Button up. Oh, that's much more polite. Button up. I love that. Button up. Sometimes you get ideas about the paper and give them the floor. Cool. One more. I love these. I always get great ideas. One more courageous person. Let's do it.
Stay curious.
Stay curious. Stay curious. And if in doubt, and you can't be curious, and you're feeling reactive and you're feeling triggered, just or zip it or button up, right? And breathe. It gives you a chance to breathe. You're not going to end up saying something you regret, and you can always go back. If in doubt, I have a little duck. This might not be the most politically correct thing. And emblazoned on his chest of that rubber duck, it says, shut the duck up. And it, Beth's got one. And it reminds me when I keep it actually in all sorts of places. It makes a really good talking stick too, but it's that reminder. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for staying 2 minutes late. My apologies for going over time. And the bottom line here is that little things make a huge impact. Little tweaks, big impact. And so just do those little things and then add more little things and see the magic happen, because it really does work. It really does work. So thank you all for being with me, and hopefully maybe see some of you in the wisdom mentoring. We're going to get more into difficult conversations because there's so much more. There's so much more for sure. But managing the reaction piece is huge. Okay, thank you all. Have a fabulous rest of your day wherever you are. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you, Diane. That was fantastic.